in a lot of different contexts, everybody's going to say, well, I'm not a racist. And it's an easy card to throw out there because in our minds, when you think about racism is the looking down upon somebody because of the color of their skin, because of their supposed race. And so, I'm going to mistreat you. I'm going to dominate you as soon as I get power. If your skin tone is different than my skin tone, that's racism. And there are a whole lot of people go, that's not me, man. I don't do that to somebody else. But when you start talking about prejudice, we have prejudices that we carry with us. That just means you prejudge somebody else. That's where the root of the word prejudice is, prejudge. And so you prejudge somebody by all kinds of things. You prejudge them by the clothes that they wear. You prejudge people by the accent, and that's not just like whether it's a different country. Somebody's got a Bostonian accent or like a Mississippi accent, or somebody's got inner city accent or whatever. You prejudge them. I hear your accent, and now I think something about you before I even know you. Clothes that people wear, 3-piece suit, dude in cut-off jeans that are frayed with flip-flop. You have a different feel about something. We prejudge people. I think all of us are guilty of that to some degree. We have prejudices, and we don't even realize it. And then, and even if we say, well, man, I'm really working hard on that one, then I think we have biases. We have preferences. Like I'd rather spend time with a person who acts like this, looks like this, sounds like this than I would somebody else. And maybe we wouldn't put that into the category of like I'm hating somebody else, but I am excluding by choosing one over somebody else.
So prejudice being prejudging is different from racism being racist, because you can prejudge without a malice or
it may have nothing to
hatred.
do with skin color or race. It just may be a culture. Now, a lot of times cultures have pockets of ways that they dress or act or sound, and Latin Americans, different countries they come from, have different patterns that the way they dress, the way they act, the way they sound, even their accents are different when they speak English or Spanish, and we prejudge according to, has nothing to do with race, has everything to do with culture.
Okay, and what about preference?
Yeah, I think there is I was reading a book. I don't know if you ever read a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. Really incredible book. It's a book that talks about the way your brain processes. And so it had a chapter where it talked about how it feeds into racism and prejudice. But it's the idea that our brain processes so much faster than we can actually understand. It's microprocessing. It's subconscious. And that causes us to make quick judgment calls on somebody else, because it's a development of an image of God He's given us to be able to handle a world with so much diversity with the incapacity to process it all. But what that does is it creates immediate preferences for one person over somebody else, because I have an information store inside of my brain that says historically when I've dealt with that person, things have gone better than with that person. So I prefer to be with this person because more than likely it'll be easier.
Gotcha. And so I like that, because really, based on that, I can see a person who's of a different race, but I can identify if we have some other common things, other things in common, like dress or occupation.
Went to the same school, live in the same neighborhood. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I want to say that because I think we all have a form of, it's inherent that we have certain prejudices or prejudging, but I think that's different from saying, based on my prejudging, I have a dislike, malice, or willing to kind of put you down or whatever based on what that prejudging is. That takes it to another level of what a prejudice versus being racist. And of course, sometimes you have a preference. You just prefer certain things over another.
I think, and I would say too, one of the first things we have to do is just have some humility to say that we are born with certain barriers.
Okay.
Like we, inevitably, to the point that you're talking about with Blink and that book, we have barriers. And until we can identify what some of those barriers are, our vision will be blurred. Mm-hmm. And that's why these type of relationships, these type of conversations are so critical, not just in times like these, but just in general, that we're rubbing shoulders with one another, exposing our own barriers and allowing other people to speak into that in order to have better visual acuity on how people were created in the image of God.
I'm actually glad to hear you say that, man, because something that you said a second ago, you said have enough humility to admit certain barriers. We call them, we call it baggage, and everybody has some form of baggage. With that being said, along those same lines, oftentimes I'm hearing when it comes to issues of race, I will hear the comeback for the majority of white people would say, if they say, no, I'm not racist, right? And then someone would say, well, you do benefit from white privilege. I don't receive any, no, I don't benefit from white privilege. What are you talking about? I had to work hard and do these type of things. What do you hear? Why do you think there's such a pushback from white people to admit that in an American context, if you're white born, especially a white male born in America, there is a certain privilege that you get that minorities don't? I mean, when you hear that, what goes to your mind? Why do you feel that's so hard for most white people to say that they enjoy white privilege? Why is that so hard to admit?
Well, I think by and large we like control, and at the point if we have to admit that white privilege is a real thing, which it is without question, then that means that for us to humble ourselves before the rest of humanity, that means that we're going to have to change, and there's some grief in that, right? So there's a loss in that for us. Now, I'm not saying that is something that shouldn't be lost. In fact, it's a healthy loss. I mean, we ought to take a posture of learning, choose to empathize with one another. But I think to the point of your question, we don't want to lose control or position.
And so, okay, so to admit that you have privilege would be to admit that you have an upper position.
Yeah.
Okay. My thing is this.
I'm embarrassed that is who I think the general population of white people are. But yeah.
Well, and something that I would want to say, and because you enjoy white privilege, that doesn't make you racist. It doesn't make you racist that you was born into a system that you have a privilege. That doesn't make you racist. It only becomes a racist type deal if you utilize your white privilege to oppress and to express malice. But it's not a matter of fact. If you have privilege, just like you would, if I have privy to information on a stock tip, I may share it with Jason. It's a problem if I keep that stock tip away from you because of your race. An example was, I remember going to the gym to play basketball. This is years ago. So I'm black, I'm 6'3", and I had never been to this gym before. But me walking through the door, being black and 6'3" and a dude, there's certain things that assume prejudices, prejudging that I can play ball, which is true. So when I come
He's all right.
So when I come into the gym, within 2 games, I get picked up, right? Well, there was a white boy who came in with me, right after I came in, and I noticed he had been sitting down like for 5 games, and so when a game was coming up, I said, man, you're not hooping? He said, I ain't got picked up yet. I said, have you called game? He said, well, I called game, but you know how it goes. So when the next game came back up, when I saw we had game, I said, say, man, pick up the white boy, man. He been in for like 5 games. Pick the dude up, let the man run with us. All right, bro, you can run. What I did was I used my privilege, my perceived privilege, to give him an opportunity to play basketball, right? Now, it turns out he wasn't a very good basketball player, but that's not the point. The point was he deserved the right to play like anybody else and show whether he can play or not.
I think it's interesting.
That makes sense?
So absolutely, it makes sense. So here's what's interesting. So I'm Latino. So you have all kinds of discussions about. I'm pretty fair complected. I got lighter eyes, and I can be confused with Anglo. But I look at it from a neutral position because I don't feel like I have any kind of white privilege. Being Latino, I have my own things that I deal with, but I can look at it and I can see the dialogue from a different perspective. And I'll tell you, from a non-white person who hears a white person wrestle with it, because my church is about 67% Anglo. So there's a lot of that. And they get really angry at the term white privilege, oftentimes, mainly because it's tough to see when that's where you are. So like you talk about the fact that you went into a gym and you were self-aware that there's a certain amount of privilege you have being 6'3", black, and just an assumption you can play ball, which, praise the Lord, is true. Yeah, absolutely. But if you were not self-aware, like that's a privilege, and dude, that dude just must be sorry. That's why he's sitting over there. Right. Then, and if somebody accused you of having black privilege in that moment, you go, what are you talking about, man? I ain't got no black privilege. If you're not self-aware, you get angry at being told that. You have to know that on your own, which sometimes is just a history lesson. You got to understand the history of people and the advantages you've been given. Without seeing that, you get accused, you get angry.
And I can see that because I could default to, no, man, I worked hard. I practiced every day. I did all this stuff to be able to play basketball, but that's not the point. And to press that further, if the white dude would have came in demanding, hey, y'all going to pick me up. You're going to pick me up today. I can't even play. It's different coming from him than coming from someone who shares the same privilege.
Sure.
And that's why I believe more white people need to at least acknowledge it and have that conversation that, yo, man, like, we're not putting we are self-aware that we're in a situation that we'll be getting afforded opportunities just off what we look like that the next man may not. And I don't think anything is, I think that's at the very least, let's acknowledge that first, I would think.
And I think there's an integrity issue at stake here for not sharing the responsibility of being self-aware. You know, so for somebody who has privilege, whatever area or aspect that might be, I mean, there is a responsibility for us to recognize that and leverage that for the gospel and for the good.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to humility in a sense. But yeah, there's an integrity issue when we won't even acknowledge it.
Right. And that's so frustrating, man. Because it's like I'm not accusing you of being racist. I'm just saying, just acknowledge that the playing field isn't equal. I mean,
that's part of the problem. This is something that I've in my own congregation as I've been having conversation with people. One of the things that they've told me, and I hadn't seen before, which has been eye-opening, is that like it does with everything else, it's become politicized, the term white privilege.
Sure.
Now there's all this extra baggage that goes with it,
right,
and accusations that can go with it, when maybe if we, and I'm not recommending this, but if a white person is going to understand it, it's probably going to have to be spoken on different terms. Because it's gotten a different dictionary now to that term, white privilege. Mm-hmm. It now means you are racist to a white person.
Wow.
When they hear that, you are calling me racist. So, okay, well, if it's white advantage, that's fine. It's a different term. Can you understand what it's saying? Can you recognize that part of it? Maybe we need to talk differently. This is why these conversations are so important.
Wow.
Because we have a chance to say, let's talk about what it is and what it isn't.
Wow. I like that.
I love hearing you say, and I've heard you say it before just because we hang out, but that is balm to my soul in a sense, to hear you say white privilege doesn't mean that you're racist. And I think, to your point, Jason, man, that is a great differentiation that needs to be made on a regular basis.
Right.
So I appreciate that.
So and so, Jason, from the perspective of, and Jason educated, I asked Jason, is there a preferred way to reference Latinas, Hispanics, Latino, Hispanic, Latin America, whatever? Like what's the preferred title or address? What is preferred address?
Yeah, so if you've got 100 Latinos watching or Hispanics watching, they're going to give you 100 different answers on this one. It really is if you want to know how to approach somebody, you got to figure out what their preference is, because there are many who prefer to be called Latinos. Now, if you're from Spain, you don't want to be called Latino because that means Latin American. Hispanic can have a negative connotation because it's kind of a self-imposed word from others upon Hispanics, but it's also a way to self-identify. There are many, though, who say, no, don't call me Latino, don't call me, I'm Mexicano, I'm Argentino, I'm Colombiano, whatever. Call me by my country, not by this big group. And so it just depends on the person.
So with that being said, I mean, I think we can agree that whatever the ascription is, do they consider themselves a minority in America?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
so with that being said, does that particular minority, because in the black community, especially if you're raising boys, we got to have the talk with them, right? And the talk that every black parent must have with a black child that they're raising is, how do you come home if you ever get stopped or encounter the police? That's a real conversation that has to be happening. And with my 16-year-old who's now driving, I'm always thinking about it if he's gone after dark, if he gets pulled over. Do you know what to do? Do you know how to say? Do you know how to conduct yourself? Do you know how to present yourself in a very humble, non-threatening type way? These are the type of conversations that we have in the black community. Does that also happen in the brown community?
That's a great question. And we had, in the conversation we had yesterday, I thought brought some real light to this, just in the capacity of Latinos to assimilate into the larger culture seems to be greater than it is in the black community.
It's easier to assimilate.
Easier to.
Right.
And, like I said, look at me. If you're watching this and you're black or white, you might go, that dude's white. His name's Jason.
His name's
Paredes
Jason.
is, there's not a single drop in my blood that is not Hispanic.
Wow.
But I'm fair complected. And so it's easier for me to assimilate. I have an Anglo wife, which means my children are the least Hispanic looking children you have ever seen. 2 of my children are Chinese, which makes them especially not Hispanic looking. So the conversations are really different that we have. And we're having more conversations with our Chinese children about some of the racism that's coming since COVID-19 happened in China than we are right now with my daughters, one of whom is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, which I don't know where that came from. Still talking to my wife about that one. But they don't look like it. But you have plenty of Latinos who are very dark-complected, what you call mestizo, and more native, Aztecan, Mayan, that kind of look. And you have to talk, but it's different. It's more about immigration. Like, okay, don't get angry, because what's going to happen is somebody's going to say, something snarky about where you're from, go back to your home country, whatever, not knowing that you were born and raised in this country. So you have to have some of those conversations. People will look down. They're going to think less of you, especially if you have an accent when you speak. Like, they're going to think you're not as intelligent. Don't let it get to you. And so those are all the kind of things that...
So it's a different type of conversation.
Right.
But the conversation, again, is that there's a different set of rules that we have to have as minorities. And in our mind, if you want to survive and not be prejudged in a negative way in America. And so I think that's something that I really want our white brothers and sisters to realize. There's a different type of tension and pressure that we're under as minorities. You know what I mean? And so and that's not a racist part on our perspective. It's the reality of the America that we live in. Now, so Jeff, what I'm going to do, we have another pastor, Jeff from North Davis. We don't have a chair for you, but if you want to come have a seat right here on the stage, brother, and I can defer to you on certain things, you're cool enough. You can make the stage look cool if you want to sit right there. And so another thing that I want to ask, and this is a question very much directed to my white brothers and sisters. And let me just say, much of our conversation is directed towards white, brown, and black Christians, because we believe that that's our plumb line, that we are all brothers and sisters in Christ. So we're having this conversation. If you're on some other stuff, then you can log off. This is really a conversation, a family conversation, that we just don't all look alike, but we're all brothers in Christ. And so one of the big frustrations that we hear is, and I hear people getting blasted now over social media, like, you guys are silent. You guys aren't saying jack. Y'all ain't saying nothing. And so now I'm hearing evangelical whites being called out for their silence. And so I was sitting back thinking, and here's my question. What prevents a white person? What makes them complicit in, what makes them silent to not address certain things? Now, I have a presupposition. I could be dead wrong on this, but I think it's 2 reasons, and y'all correct me or help me on this. That number one, I think a white person is silent on addressing certain issues because, one, they feel as though I don't know what to say without being offensive. So I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So there's a certain intrepidation because I don't want to say the wrong things. I already just don't say anything. So I just don't want to talk about it all. That's one. And 2, could it go as deeply as in some of our earlier American days when you don't want to be termed as an in lover or a in empathizer, and that would cause you to be somewhat ostracized in your community if people feel that you are being too empathetic to black people. Am I anywhere on the right page with that? Speak to me on that. What's going on with that?
Go ahead. I mean, I think your first supposition was exactly correct. I think it's fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not knowing what to say. And so it's, the old saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all.
Right.
And so that's been ingrained in people along the way, to where when something needs to be said, they get clammy in the sense of, well, what if I say something wrong? I mean, you see all over social media right now, and I'll just use this as an example, and I don't really want to dive into it because I'm still trying to let the onion layers unfold, but this whole thing with Drew Brees, right? He says something.
Oh, my goodness. Let's talk
and
about
then
that.
he just gets annihilated on social media. Now he's come back today and trying to backtrack a little bit. But I think that's the fear, is if I say something, I will be misunderstood, or it will be the wrong thing. And so, as you know, we had conversations recently. Our leadership is about to come out with a video that kind of
yes
that is hopefully going to help build bridges, not only within our own membership but across the city. But it is very much of the stance of, we're trying to listen, we're trying to understand. Help us along that way.
And Jason, so you not Jason. This is Jason. Jeff, the Jays. You said something that it wasn't even on my agenda to talk about, but I gotta press it. Let me first say, when you don't know what to say nothing is worse. You'd be better if you can't say nothing else. You can say, "Hey, that's wrong." If you don't have to go into a lot of sociological, historical inferences, you can just say, "Hey, guys, I don't know how to explain it, but that ain't right." I mean, that's all I can say is that's not right, that's wrong. That is more powerful than saying nothing. When you say nothing, it looks like you don't care and you're not even looking. And you only have your eyes open on certain things that jail well. But with the Drew Brees thing, now I didn't hear it, but he said something about defending, still doubling down on Kaepernick kneeling, and how it was disrespect to the flag. Now, let me tell y'all something. Now, I didn't hear it, but I didn't hear him say it, but I heard the buzzings of afterwards. I'm a veteran myself, so I'm a soldier. I was a soldier during Desert Storm when they activated that type of stuff. I think it's insulting for this man to say this is about police brutality, has nothing to do with disrespecting troops, and he says this. Even it comes out that that he consulted soldiers on what's the best way to make this statement, and they said, "Well, you take a knee for a fallen brother," and he's taking a knee for the fallen black people who are dying. We're not even talking about being the bad arrest and sentencing. That's another topic. And he says this, and people still choose to make it about an issue that he's saying is not about. And now when something comes out that enforces his point, you still double down on making it about troops. That is frustrating. Talk to me about why don't people want to let that go and make it about disrespect? By the way, and they act like we honor the flag all the time anyway. You know what I'm saying? So talk to me, help me out with that, because I don't understand why people would choose to stay locked in on something when the man from his own mouth and people have shared with him that wasn't what that was about. Talk to help me on this. I don't understand that.
I think it comes back to how you perceive the world. Your reality is influenced by a whole lot of different things that feed into it. So, I'm thinking back to what was said even earlier. You said, like, from your perspective, right? To say nothing is the worst thing you could do. Right. It would be better for you to say something and get it wrong than to say nothing at all. So that's true for certain communities. For other communities, to say the wrong thing is the worst thing you could do. Okay. So their perspective is, just don't screw it up. And I'll be honest with you, from a Latino perspective, that's very true. There's a shame culture in Latin culture, in Latino culture, so that if you say something dumb or unnecessarily abrasive, you are shamed by everyone else around you. So it's better for you not to say something than to say the wrong thing. So a completely antithetical view of how we approach an issue. And so I think the same thing bleeds into this issue, that it's the way you perceive an action. It's a language. So si empiezo a hablar en español, no me entiendes. If I begin to speak in Spanish, you don't understand me. because it's a different language. And so I'm saying
Felt you
stuff,
though the Spirit interpreted.
Yeah.
That you didn't.
Did you get that one?
That you didn't intend
Praise the
anything.
Lord, man.
Something I heard it in the Spirit.
because every Latino right now knows what I said, but not you.
Right.
But it's a language barrier. It's a way, it is intelligible speech that I just gave, but it wasn't understood. It was understood differently.
Sure, that's good.
So
That's
it's the
good.
same way that
That's
we
good.
interpret these situations.
So with that one, is there a reason that, and I don't want that to monopolize, because I was about to say on the same token, is hypocritical to say that, not from the Latin perspective, Latin community perspective, but we have a president who always says dumb stuff, but he's always given a pass, and I'm not, and this is not anti or pro, but I just find it intriguing that the same people that would nail one president to a cross gives this one a pass on anything and explains away. This president is actually saying, if you loot, we shoot. And I'm not seeing outrage from them as saying, dude, I did see Pat Robertson recently said that the president was wrong, and that was big. Pat Robertson, right? He's like the oldest white Christian in the world. And so I like Pat Robertson. But I'm just saying, though, it's like it's a double standard. And I'm like, why don't we see this? So is there anything at all about the kneeling thing that I don't know as a minority that I'm missing, of why that's being tied to being anti-American if you kneel? What am I missing there? And then now we'll go on to another topic.
No, I mean, I think you're hitting it spot on. I think, we have a listening issue. I mean, we have if we have to acquiesce, and again, this is a poor perspective, but if we're acquiescing to listen to somebody, that means that we have to change. And we don't like change. I mean, none of us like change, unless if we're the one driving it. So we don't want somebody else to be pushing.
Well, we don't like change. We don't like change. We won't change if we're on the short end of the stick. We won't change.
We do.
Yeah.
And if we're on the short end of the stick, or if we're in control of that change.
There you go. Okay.
But if somebody's pushing that on, and I think that goes across the board, and that's not making an excuse for white Christians at all. But yeah, if we have to listen and we have to actually empathize, and this is more empathy, is so much more than sympathy. It's one thing for me to say, man, I'm sorry what happened.
You're right.
I'm sorry, that's really bad. But for me to enter into, like when we talked Wednesday night, or last Wednesday night, 2 Wednesday nights ago, and we wept on the phone together.
Yeah.
And I think I started the crying, and you comforted my soul.
Wow.
And I mean, that was empathy to me, as a white guy who has a black daughter.
Sure.
And I'm trying to figure out what this means for my daughter. What I just saw.
Wow, that's good. That's good.
What does that mean for me as a parent? I mean, how do I speak into this? I was at a loss.
Wow.
So.
And we've always been there. Isn't that something that we've always been in that schism of where you were in that moment?
And so for you to empathize with me,
sure.
I was able to learn, that evening from you, and that was helpful.
Well, man, I tell you, and Charles, I need you to cue me on questions there. And I tell you, just into our world, the four of us, when I let them know that I was in a bad place and I wasn't feeling good about, to have brothers who don't look like me, who are not in my situation, but to really feel and know for sure, man, that you guys not only had your own indignation about the tragedy, but you guys hurt for me. Man, that meant, oh my goodness, man. I think that's what brought the tears to my eyes. That I'm like, I get to benefit from relationships that certain people their boundaries are up because of skin color, and I get this community. And man, that just meant everything to me, just to be understood. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing, because we want people to have a better just understanding of one another without a lot of the baggage and the stuff that keeps us separated. Now I'm gonna come here, and then we're gonna shrink our response. I want to get to my question in just a second. We're gonna go here and then here.
I just wanted to mention your earlier question is, as the people of God, I think, we see life through so many different lenses. We see life through our heritage, our skin color. We see life through our nationality. We see life through our gender. But as the people of God, we've got to remember the one that trumps all of it is the fact that we are kingdom people.
Right.
And so as we look at these situations, as we look at the circumstances that we're in, that lens has got to be the dominant lens, in the sense that what we ought to care about first is humanity.
Sure.
Before we get into the flags and those quotes and the Drew Brees and all that, what I keep trying to remind our people is you've got to see situations first as the people of God with all the rest of that stuff in the background. And when we do that, I think we are a foot closer to
Sure.
having a more humane response, a more Christ-centered response, a more kingdom response, and not letting all that other frivolous stuff impact how we see situations.
And in America specifically, I understand why it may be a problem with seeing the humanity, because at one time, this is a people, unlike even people from Latin American descent, Latin descent, I always say a different thing.
That's all right, man.
Unlike them, we were literally saw as cattle. So there was a time where we weren't human, that we were not human beings, man, that we were looked at property and animals. And so from that perspective, I can see how that there's some catching up to do of seeing us as humans. White people still call black people animals. They're a bunch of animals. I've heard this stuff. And so there is a way to, and some people say, well, no, that wasn't me. That was like 100 years ago and stuff like that. And we're going to talk about that excuse I hear a bunch. But let me share with you, there's a Harvard study done by DNA, that certain trauma can be adopted and passed along a bloodline. And so we'll talk about that if we get to it. So I just want to say, man, that's some of our issue. I think some of those remnants are still in America and has been, watch this, taught down to children who are now adults raising children that they're a bunch of freaking animals.
But it's past time to be better.
Do what now?
I said it's past time to do better.
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
You know, I was just thinking, you were talking earlier about how it blessed your soul that we were able to mourn together. And the first thought I had is, if you had sent me that video 4 years ago, we'd met each other one time maybe or something like that, we wouldn't have had the visceral response together. I would have still had the same response from it and disgust, but my heart might not have broken for you, a fellow brother, pastor, friend in the city. But after we've been together for years, sharing meals together, praying for each other, doing events together in the city, speaking from different times, and every time I see you, man, I light up because you're my brother. I look forward to seeing Ronnie Goins come in the room. And so when Ronnie Goins is hurting, my heart hurts. And this is how you humanize. I look a man in the eyes and I say, holy cow, this guy Ronnie Goins is amazing. I want to know this guy. I want to spend time with this guy. This guy adds value to my life. And the moment I go through that, the moment Ronnie's hurting, dude, forget it all, man. I'm broken over that.
And I felt that, man. And again, that meant everything to me, just to know that, you know, how I'm feeling. People understand, because it's frustrating when people don't get it, and then they'll question whether or not you deserve to be frustrated. Like, you're mad, but you shouldn't be that mad. You know what I mean? And so I think that's even more frustrating from a black perspective. I want to ask a question and I think our audience will want to hear this as well. What does the term "back the blue" mean? When you hear the term "back the blue," what does that mean to you? Quickly, that anyone would take that. What does that mean, back the blue? And keep it in mind, keep in mind, back the blue came in a response to Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So let's be honest there. It wasn't always there. Go ahead.
While we're going to go ahead and be a little prickly on this one and just deal with what's some of the feeling that's taking place as I lead a congregation that has a lot of white people in it. Mm-hmm. So the statement you made earlier about that there are still white people who call black people animals is 100% true. But there's an ocean of white people who don't feel that way.
No doubt.
And sometimes what they feel is you are condemning the masses because of the pathetic behavior of a few. The same thing that many in the black community, I would assume, feel like for some reason there's some riots that break out and there's a few African Americans. You totally miss the whites that are right next to them and the Hispanics are right next to them. You see black people rioting, and therefore you say all black people are the same. This is all some kind of agenda just to steal, kill, and destroy, whatever. We are making the wrong thing of making the masses guilty for the actions of a few. The white people feel that intensely. I would never call a black person an animal, but I feel like because one white guy did it, all white people are accused of it. So it's the same thing with police.
That's just as bad.
The police feel like I'm an honest policeman. I am trying to enforce law because I love people. I want to protect people. I want to serve people. And I'm vilified because of a few actions, and the masses are put down because of the actions of a few. And so it's a response to the vilification of people who don't deserve to be vilified. And so if you're going to do that for blacks, then let's do it for police officers, because typically it's been a police and black engagement.
That's a fair statement.
And
I want to address that. Go ahead.
We do
That's
have
a
the
fair
tendency
statement.
to make much of one injustice but not of another. And I think, there's a portion, there's lots of populations that feel that way about themselves. And so I know Tuesday I spent some time with some officers that are part of my church and part of multiple different departments around here. And we just had some barbecue, and I just listened to them. And, they hated what they saw. They hated what they saw. They feel conflicted about, how do I speak to this? Because I don't want to come across as if I am disrespecting other officers or my department. But, we hated what we saw about George Floyd. They didn't even look at me and say, man, we should have watched, if you had just watched the whole video. They didn't say that to me.
Right.
They said there was no justification for anything that we saw, but they still feel so conflicted on, man, do I have a voice here? And, man, I'm fearful to say anything, for it to be taken out of context, or for me to be the next Drew Brees on SportsCenter, or that type of thing. And so, again, how do we humble ourselves and listen to all of these groups?
I've got a member of my congregation, many of them, but one I just talked to recently, who is a former law enforcement officer and black. And he's going, I feel so conflicted about my own identity right now. I feel like I almost have to hate myself.
Right.
Dude, this in our church, we have a lot of police officers. Matter of fact, that's one. Your head of security is there. He's training some of our guys with security. I'm glad to hear you say that, because one thing I want to get out: back the blue does not mean we agree with police brutality.
Exactly.
Right.
I think that's something that, when you hear it, don't be offended when you hear back the blue. That's not saying, it's not supposed to mean I back the blue at all costs, whether right or wrong.
Which, on the other side, Black Lives Matter.
That was my next one. Read my mind.
Does not mean that we hate all police officers and every other culture. It just means that black lives have innate value created in the image of God.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I think, but when depending on who hears it, they attach these other things. Now, if you're saying back the blue, now, whatever my presupposition is about police officers, and I agree, you're saying back the one that planted drugs on me? Back the one that just murdered man on TV? Come on now. And Black Lives Matter, if you hear it, you say, here's the response. Well, all lives matter. I mean, you're trying to but here's what's crazy about that. I'm always playing, but I got to kind of speak to the Black Lives Matter piece, right? That is not something that's saying Black Lives Matter more than any other life. That's not saying we are against white people. We are against police. This is not about black people against police. This is about the racism and brutality that oftentimes comes in the form of an authority figure that we see on TV, usually white, versus someone that is a minority. But here's what I want to say about the all lives matter. Of course all lives matter, but all lives aren't as in danger. If this house is on fire and the police department comes up, the fire department comes and start to put water on the house that's burning, then the neighbor across the street whose house is not burning say, well, all houses matter. But all houses aren't burning. It is a fact. The data, the numbers speak to themselves. Black men are being disproportionately executed on the streets. And we're not even talking about some of the bad arrests. We're now seeing things that I just saw a deal yesterday where a police officer on camera charged a young black man with assault on a police officer. The whole thing is filmed. Police officer around trying to de-escalate this. The black guy was cussing them out with everything. And the officer charged him with assault on a public servant and arrested him. And everybody around said, he never touched you. And so those types of bad arrests, false bad police reports, all that stuff is not even on the table, but it happens disproportionately. And that's what we're saying. We matter as it pertains to our lives, because I have not wrapped my mind around how can you see a camera rolling and you still do what you do. I still don't get that part.
Ronnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a parable in Scripture where Jesus talks about going after the one who's in danger? Doesn't mean the other
99.
The 99
Yeah.
doesn't mean they're any less valuable.
Yeah.
It just means the one that's in danger needs his attention.
I plan to preach that Sunday, sir. I plan to deal with that.
And so when we talk about this idea of Black Lives Matter, we have to remember that we're not devaluing everyone else.
Sure.
We're simply trying to bring to attention the need to emphasize and to appreciate and to show
Sure.
the beautifulness of
Sure.
the Black community.
And how about ask this question? Well, is it true? Do Black Lives Matter? At least start with, yes, Black Lives Matter. It's like, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. Wait a minute. Like, that's retort to Black Lives Matter. Okay, that's true, but can you at least acknowledge, yes, Black Lives Matter, and so do all other lives. But it's like all lives matter is like a retort in an argument against Black Lives Matter. I just find that intriguing.
That goes back to that language thing. So from the viewpoint of a white person, and even I would imagine, I haven't heard a lot of Latinos get into this conversation, but for a white person, when they say all lives matter, they're going, see, yes, I'm saying Black Lives Matter. I'm just saying all lives matter. And so in their minds, they're saying, I am agreeing with you. Even though it's not heard, it comes off as a retort.
And I think it's very important to understand, again, the whole gym analogy, right? I think because the playing field is not equal, because we did not all start at the same place, it just makes sense that certain concessions and empathy must be shown to the individual who suffered the most and honestly, trauma. There's a lot of trauma in the Black community, man.
Well, I want to say something to this. This is I'm going to preach on this on Sunday as well for our congregation. So no one's going to even have to come to the sermon now because I'm going to give it to you all right now.
Come on, preach.
The number one mistake I think that happens isn't among white people primarily, and I know I'm speaking outside of myself, but the number one thing that happens is that there are white people who don't understand the trauma in the history of the Black American.
Yes, sir. Right.
And because of that, they're saying the playing field is equal. I mean, yeah, I know there was slavery. It's a few hundred years ago, whatever, but that's done away with. I don't have slaves. I'm not doing this stuff. So
that's good.
The playing field is equal now. Let's just all come together. But what would happen if a white person or a Latino or an Asian would read about Black history, would learn? There's a book I recently read called Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. I just throw out books. I've only read 4, but I throw each one of them out. And it talks about how this is the history, and here's where the church has been complicit, specifically the white church, by being silent when all this stuff was taking place. And I read it, man. I wept so many mornings as I was reading this book. And my heart changed by recognizing now that we're not at the same starting block, when we do this, because I now understand history. That's true. Same thing for Native Americans, same thing for the immigrant, the Latino coming in. Like, there's a history of being removed from land and cast out. And when we understand each other's histories, all of a sudden we empathize totally differently.
Well, let me make a confession, because there was a point in my life where I would say, man, slavery's done. And this is a common conversation that the white community will have toward this. Man, that was X amount of years ago. Man, get over it, right? Which is the antithesis of empathy. When I adopted my Black daughter, and man, she is the apple of my eye. And I have a beautiful biological 13-year-old too. But everything changed for me in terms of this conversation, because I began to understand, really, for the first time, that the playing field was different for her. What my biological 13-year-old, who is extraordinary in every way equally, her runway is just different.
That's right.
And the white community, to Jason, your point, and this goes for all of us, but we have to do a greater job, a disciplined job of understanding. I'll throw a great book out, White Fragility, that speaks into the reason why we don't address our vision into this. But we have to begin to look into history.
Yeah.
History. And we cannot separate. We love to compartmentalize our history from everybody else's. But that's not how humanity was created under the image of God. And so for us to live in true community, then we have to begin to understand. And as we talked about earlier, man, we're looking at each other face to face in our eyes. We're asking questions.
Right.
We're letting you steal off of our plate at lunchtime, right?
I haven't gotten there yet, man. I don't let them quite yet.
You're like slapping his hand away. But anyways, yeah, I don't want to give away my sermon on Sunday.
I think we do the same thing with our faith as well. If we don't realize we have a historic faith that connects back with Judaism and the long history of people, then we are shallow Christians. If we don't realize we live in a country with a very diverse history, then we are shallow American citizens.
Wow.
And we need to diversify and grow in our depth of understanding each history that takes place, not just the conquering history. And that's a really big difference.
So let me throw out a book, because I read. I want to challenge you guys to check out The New Jim Crow.
Okay.
The New Jim Crow, because I think when we talk about history and how we're so far removed from what happened, we think about slavery. But no, the Jim Crow, that was in 1900s. So we're not as far removed. And think about it now, we just started voting. It's been 100 years. I mean, so a lot of things aren't as far removed. And about 50, 60 years ago, it was dangerous to go vote. Women just got their rights not too long ago. So we're talking about history. This is not archaic history. There's things in this century that we're just now kind of coming out of. So I think that's important to not just look at slavery's done with, but how long was affirmative action put into place? And some people say affirmative action is a form of discrimination, which I think, well, that's a whole nother topic. But it's kind of like I don't want people to think that things have been right or how they are for a long period of time. Black people just now start to get opportunity. There used to be a time that you couldn't get a bank loan. You couldn't buy a house in certain areas because of the color of your skin. So things have not always been equal, quote unquote, as you are right now. And man, when Barack Obama messed around and got elected president, oh my God, that now there's no such thing as black people don't have, because he was a president. So Charles, we got to take a couple questions, man, before we get ready to raise up. We have a meeting with the chief of police here in just a minute.
Well, first question that I saw that was good, when you spoke about there also being good cops who serve and do what they're supposed to do, are we wrong for expecting them to see it as their obligation to call out and even report the fellow officers that they see who are not doing good things and like mistreating people?
That's what you're saying, that some are frustrated. They're kind of frustrated. I think it's a slightly different question. One is frustrated in that they see the bad things, but the question is, and we have a former police officer here, the question is it unfair for us to expect them to hold each other accountable? I just think absolutely not. That's not unfair. That's expected, because at the end of the day, if another police officer breaks the law, they go to jail too. Well, we saw what happened to George Floyd. He broke the law. And there was a dereliction of duty not to hold him accountable to abide by the law. So that's a no-brainer for me. Of course, we should expect them to hold their fellow officers accountable.
Law officers, they swear an oath.
Yeah, they swear an oath to us, as a matter of fact. Right.
Yeah, and so they got to maintain that. And you got to hold each other accountable.
Sure.
If I'm a police officer and I'm sitting next to another one, I know the oath that police officer swore.
That's right.
I got to hold him accountable to it.
Yeah. So accountability is a word in of itself. That's a good question. You got another one?
Another one was, what should the black church and even the white, and it's sad that we even have to say it like that, But what work needs to be done for us to unify, not only just around topics like this, but just to become more unified as a church body, because it still seems like there's a lot of division and even segregation within the church as a whole. So what type of work do we need to start doing in order to unify and make that look different?
You know, if I can just jump in here real quick, I think this is the place of the multi-ethnic church. I think it's really important, and I understand. So I don't know as much about the black community as far as church, but I know a whole lot about the Latino community. And there's a lot of pressure to say we got to maintain culture, we got to maintain language, and so we want to have a Spanish church because we want to propagate the culture. We're losing it over here. But the role of and I would imagine there's some of that in the black community, but the role of the multi-ethnic church to say we're going to come with all of our friction, different political views, different ideologies, and we're going to wrestle and choose to be one and stick it out because we're family adopted into the same family, I think speaks volumes to a world that needs to see unity when there's so much segregation.
You want to say something on that, Eric? And again, and Chuck, I think what we're doing right here is a major step in that direction, that differences aren't bad. And so I think church is more about culture than color, for the most part. I mean, it's like, you can be white or black, but that church that looks like you isn't necessarily your style or your comfort zone for worship and words. So I think that would work its way out. I would just say, for pastors that would be viewing, take the pressure off yourself to feel as though you are less Christian because your congregation looks a certain way. I don't think that's an indictment on your church because a certain predominantly race comes to your church.
Maybe a couple of things, to add to that point right there. I mean, the local church ought to reflect the community. It ought to reflect the community. I mean, you can't expect there to be a multi-ethnic church in maybe a small town that's not multi-ethnic, right?
Sure.
I think there's also some real subtle bad theology that kind of plays into the reason why we don't connect.
Come on, Dr. Hurston.
I'll just give one example, okay? So we say God doesn't see color. Man, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Dumbest thing in the world. So
God absolutely sees color.
Yeah.
I mean, have you read?
He made it.
Have you read Genesis to Revelation? I mean, He loves color. I mean, He created us uniquely and differently, and I mean, He values that, and He values it in such a way that He says, "I want y'all to be community together, so that you see my creativity in creating mankind and humankind, and you celebrate that."
Come on, man.
And so, there's subtle things like that. And I don't know where that originated from.
Neither do I.
But, there are instances where...
It was not a brown dude that originated that. I just want you to know that. I don't know where it came from, but it wasn't a Latino. I promise you that.
Well, it wasn't a Jew either. And I think, we need to look more like Jesus in that way than even our own cultural bias.
And so now, guys, here's what we're going to do, because we have a meeting that we cannot be late for. We have come together, and we're planning a citywide event that's going to be the bomb.com. It's happening tomorrow from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Cornerstone Baptist Church's parking lot, right there on the corner of Matlock and Green Oaks. We originally was going to have it at a high school, but we kind of changed it. We don't want any restrictions of what we can or can't do in that situation. So now we have even a bigger space with Cornerstone Baptist Church parking lot. If you're anywhere from Arlington, you know where Cornerstone is. We're inviting the entire city out, guys. And we're not only going to have a time of worship and coming together, and because this is what it's going to look like, but we also are praying that we have some resolutions to give y'all tomorrow night of here's what some steps, tangible steps that we're going to take towards having a stronger and better Arlington. So and come out tomorrow night. Be early. We're going to have the LED screens up. It's going to be a good time. And if you have teenagers, bring your teenagers, because we want to show them there's a right and a wrong way to express yourself, right? And this is not going to be something with candy coating or anything. We're going to talk about real issues, but we're going to do it in a way that doesn't discredit the kingdom. So bring your young people out. Come out tomorrow night. We'll have a time where as one people who are all hurting about the same stuff, we're frustrated about the same stuff. We just happen to look different, right? And I think this is a great moment for us to kind of stand up and show the nation right here. Here's what my brother is feeling. Here's what my brother is thinking. Here are our common frustrations. here's the common goal, and here's the step towards getting us towards that goal. So tomorrow night, guys, come out. You can bring your lawn chairs, or you want to bring out, bring your mask. Bring your mask with you. Bring your mask. But tomorrow night, guys, please, Koinonia, I want you guys to be deep tomorrow night. Come right, get there by 5:30. Get you a good space. You want to shout out Lake Church to be there?
Lake Church, you guys know about it. Come out. We have done this before a few years ago. It was incredible. It was a lot of fun. So be a part of this.
Yeah, I know Fielder Church is going to be there because you guys are ready to do something. So we're going to be there tomorrow night. It's going to be amazing.
Hubba Bubba.
North Davis will be there.
North Davis will
We're
be
in.
there. That was about as white as you could have been just then, bro. I'm tripping. All this.
Ronnie, look at me.
North Davis going to be there. So, guys, listen, man. Thank y'all for tuning in. Yes, sir. Food boxes. When? Today? Also, Arlington, Texas, Metroplex, we're giving away boxes of groceries today. Right out front, drive up, pop your trunk. We'll load you up with groceries. It's not just dry food items. We're giving away meat, chicken and turkey and all that good stuff. Come by, and if you're good on food and you don't need any groceries, you come on by anyway. You get a box of groceries and take to someone else who may be in need. Here's the only thing we ask. If you take a box of groceries to a neighbor, a family member, or whatever, just be sure to mention the name of Jesus. Because if you don't mention Jesus' name, you're doing a favor and not ministry. So the line is up right now. Chuck, they can come now. Is it started right now? You don't know? It's now? Yeah. I think you come up now to start getting groceries. If not, then you just wait and help serve groceries, okay? All right, guys, we got to get ready for our deal. Man, thank you. Oh, Hubba Bubba, thank you. God bless you. Love y'all to life. See y'all tomorrow night. Be early, Cornerstone. Or are we related? See you then. God bless.